Well, I'm really excited about tonight's talk. First of all, thank you all for coming. This is a wonderful group, especially since we're going to have I can tell we're going to have a pretty vibrant Q&A session at the end with all the people that are here. If you're a friend or a family member of the A&H family, you don't have to really get an introduction into Carole and how wonderful Carole de Inverno is. Carole is or was a two-time artist in residence here at A&H. We all kind of brighten up when we hear that Carole's coming into town and is available for. Carole, one of my tasks tonight is to keep Carole awake because Carole flew in. She was at the Duluth airport at 4 o'clock this morning. So Carole has a solo show up at the Duluth Art Institute, and we'll probably mention that tonight. The one thing that I'm really proud about, and I include all of the team that we have here at A&H right now, and our resident artists, is we are trying to do some really substantive work. When I put together this season of exhibitions last spring, I lose track now. The season is based on a series of what I called uncommon conversations, and it's just a general term to mean what happens if you involve the artists that are in the exhibition in every aspect of its planning, in every aspect of its. I think the fact that I am an artist, and I think an artist first before I'm a curator, is the fact that I realize how brilliant most of the artists I interact with are. And I think that if you did allow them to tell their story, and that if you operate in a role of facilitating their story in as much of an authentic way as you could, then the results would be pretty spectacular, And I think our current exhibition with Elizabeth Condon's work and Carole's work is an example of that. When I first proposed it, there was a little bit of like, what? Why do we want to do this? And both Carole and Elizabeth don't need to be in group shows right now. They don't need to be in, they have, they're highly respected in their communities. And but I thought they're both such powerhouse artists, and they both have such an affinity for. They both have left a mark on A&H, and A&H has left a mark on them, that I thought this would be a wonderful thing to have Carole back and have her talk about that. So please welcome Carole de Inverno.
Hi. All right. Well, let's start.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah.
So the great thing is.
Oh, he's got questions written down.
No, I'm gonna show you.
I'm in trouble.
So the great thing is. Wait. I'm going back. I can't. This is so weird. I can't get my mouse is not working. Oh my God, I'm screwing this all up. Here you go.
You're just blowing the whole thing out.
Okay, so here it is. So we were texting back and forth, and I was like, listen, just like the exhibition, I want you to feel free to talk about anything you want to talk about. So this was Carole's text. Oh, I really want to talk about abstraction, how a tree becomes an object, and then when you represent it, it becomes a new object. So I was like, I love that. And then we went on to, also using information, printed matters, designs, renderings to make a piece that might look very abstract, thinking about Mark Bradford. And finally, why the fuck do we have to splice all this stuff and shove it into tiny boxes? Great, such a great talk, I'm excited. And then she's like, get those questions ready. I kind of knew that because Carole was going to be in town, I didn't have to do much of the question asking, because I knew that the wonderful people of this community are going to show up and ask some wonderful questions. But I do have one, but we will proceed. The first thing I came across, and I remembered this, geez, why is my thing doing this? Hang on a second. So the first thing I did was came across this quote by Motherwell, and I thought it was pretty apt to what Carole's going to talk about. Carole hasn't seen anything that I have on the screen, by the way. So nothing as drastic as an innovation as abstract art could have come into existence save as the consequence of a most profound, relentless, unquenchable need. The need for felt experience. Intense, immediate, direct, subtle, unified, warm, vibrant, vivid, rhythmic. So I just thought, with knowing Carole's work so much, and the first kind of prompt that I have for her, I think maybe think about your work, but also respond to this quote. And the first prompt I have for you is, for those who are not familiar with your working method, can you give us a brief explanation of what drives your specific process of abstraction?
I could be here till tomorrow, so I'm gonna try and just kind of, I think there's different levels to why I've chosen that. I used to paint figurative, and I finally just gave it up. I think part of it is that I grew up in Europe post-World War II. You're surrounded by, imageries, and each and every one is framed in a way that has a very specific story, be it about religious content or some white male on a white horse. It's basically, that's what you see, and that's what resonates. And being born 10 years after the end of World War II, my generation we didn't want to hear about how fantastic the philosophy was, how extraordinary the Western contribution was to the world, because we would just look at the adults and say, wait, 44 million people died, 6 million is in the camps, what are you talking about? So there was this complete pushback against that idea, that representation of what, and it was just really and as a young girl, for me, it was a representation of male power. I always felt that from very beginning. I felt like and even, Motherwell is talking about abstraction within the white male construct. So there was that. I never related to it, and I still don't. I mean, it's not something that, but I did paint figurative. I think part of it was because I felt that it gave me a measure of, just a human measure, so that I could see, I still do live drawings and stuff that I still do. So just to try to keep the meter in my head. But what happens when I start a painting, usually I try to navigate away from the representational, because I know it's going to push me into a corner, and it's going to make me have to just either fail or succeed through that gap. I know that much. So I always put myself in that situation where it's going to challenge me, it's going to force me to just not be happy. I can spend 2 weeks on this one, 3 weeks on a painting and not knowing where it goes, because I'm trying to navigate away from the representational, until what happens, even if it ends up being recognizable shapes, because I think I've gotten through that little gap, if I'm fortunate that day, there is a certain, speaking of the rhythm, there is a certain rhythm of my hand that, I'm klutzy, I don't draw, I've learned to let go of that completely. I just let my hand go wherever it wants to go. So the shapes are wonky, but I've learned to accept that as being part of who I am. So it's really, for me, it's a discovery, the abstraction part of something. It really pushes me out of my comfort zone, very much so, which is where I want to be, because I want to learn. I want to be able to, not knowing what's going to happen is essential to my process. So I do a lot of research. I do these series that are targeted to specific places, and and then when I'm done with all that, I really like to just completely let go and see what those connections have done in my brain. I just kind of, and to that all thing, on top of everything else, then I add that intellectual knowledge is actually, to it I add also understanding of the contribution of abstraction by women for centuries and centuries and centuries. You know, there's a book that's called Women's Work, the First 20,000 Years, and it basically is what we refer to as textiles. And that knowledge that women have that is so profound and so long, it's been thousands of years that we've been doing this. So there's all these other intellectual reasons why I do it. But essentially is that it really pushes me out of my comfort zone.
So in your initial text to me, you said, so a tree becomes an object, and then when you look at it, and then you represent it, it becomes a new object. So you dealing with local histories.
Right.
Are you trying to reconfigure them into something else, or are you trying to represent them in a...
You know, it's hard for me to say it until I'm done with the show. I really don't quite, I really like to, again, if I'm looking at information and make shapes in my head, and I try to just go to that rather than the next obvious step, which would be a more representational shape. And I just kind of try to grasp onto that. And to that, I also try to, like I said, after I've kind of digested all the information, my hope is that then a certain connection is made with my personal life, where I can actually have a plug-in where I feel, oh, okay, this is gonna scrape some stuff of my brain. I'm gonna be very engaged with this, and you know, I think for both the Duluth show in Minnesota and this one very much have to do with the land, and in this case for me is really what is, you know, to me what is going on in Florida is just hell-raising. I mean, to me, the destruction of the land here is just, I mean, this is one of the most, you know, painful things to look at in terms of like boom and bust, which is a very American way of life, to see how the land is being destroyed, but at the same time to see those parts where you can still see the strength of it and the beauty of it. So to me, that was kind of the way you know, the references, the titles have kind of this idea behind it. The land that feeds you, shimmery, all these, you know, deep boom is from Zora Neale Hurston's short story where she describes after the rains, hearing the alligator, the boom, you know, the big deep boom dying and coming and dying. So all these things became, because of having been here, they became, I integrated in myself, and I was able to just kind of come back out after all that information. And so it's a weird, I don't really have a straight answer. I can't say this is what it is. It's more, again, it's my process. I don't want to know where I'm going. I don't. It's not good for me. I don't, you know, and so I don't know what, I'm not sure, you know, how people are perceiving the show. I have no idea, but that's pretty much what.
But in knowing that in conversations with you during the process of putting the show together, and seeing like the Duluth show and the research and the really in-depth research you did for that about migrations of people and how the land was affected. I found this quote from, if we're going to talk about abstraction, we should talk about, why is this going by? Joan Mitchell, right? So she says, you know, I paint from remembered landscapes that I carried with me and remembered feelings of them. I was thinking of Leo as well, which of course become transformed. I can never mirror nature, so I paint what nature leaves with me, a feeling about Lake Michigan or what water or fields. It's more like a poem. Now this sounds incredibly positive to me, but it also can represent the negative aspects of what is being done to the land and how that is creating, you know, I was actually thinking of Leo's work a lot when I came across this, you know.
Yeah.
So does that make sense to you? Is that like?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. That's what happens. I think you know, the research brings me to, I go to those places and I look around and, you know, I try to see, trying to find those those spots where the things have changed, say in the landscape, because that tells me, okay, this is human passage. This happened. This is how it altered nature, and then did it come back or did it change? Was, you know, like in the case here in Florida, again, going back to that, once all this scraping of that layer is gone, that's it. It's never going to come back, even if you just took, you know, got rid of all these houses, all of a sudden, this development's all overnight. It's never going to come back. It's just not there anymore. So I kind of have, I think it's because, you know, I've been here for 40 years and I dearly, dearly love this country. And I've been doing this in different places. And I think the most destructive thing that we have as Americans is this boom and bust kind of attitude that keeps just kind of, we all gather somewhere and then everything gets exploited over the, you know, and then we just go somewhere else. But I think we're left with a lot of, you know, I was just reading this book on, you know, New Mexico, and you know, they were blowing up, you know, nuclear test bombs until 1992.
Right.
And the land is just a mess, you know. So there is all that. To me, is always very present. That kind of hurt that's been made in the, you know.
Because landscape, and this is why I mentioned Leo's work when I saw this quote, because landscape becomes such a general symbol of those experiences when, and I know this is a bold statement, but it's like when you're a child, there's a level of innocence involved, right? And then as time progresses and you get involved with growing older and encountering the world as it really is or whatever, you want to both hold on to those things or reckon with those things that are those memories that are often associated with landscape. And those memories, because they're memories, often become abstracted and abstracted and abstracted. So,
Yeah.
you know, I know in conversations with you and Elizabeth, you know, Elizabeth has those wallpaper memories of that, you know, her house when she was growing up in LA, but it becomes a symbol to her of this thing that she has to grapple with. Does that make sense? Like,
Oh yeah, and for me it's different simply because I came, like I said, from Europe, and as a child, you know, there were mines still blowing up and people getting hurt, and all these things were still very present, the post-war. And coming to America felt like, oh, this is not, you know, it's not happening here. You know, I felt like this other level of kind of safety around it that was, again, it was not real, you know, because then I started studying. It's like, well, no, this is not, you know. But I think another thing that I've always been, and I think just about anybody, I mean, you go out west, you get a sense of how vast the country is. I mean, in Europe, if you travel 3 days, you're pretty much in mid Africa. Okay, here it's like you just, oh, okay, maybe you'll get to, you know, to the Rockies or something, you know, and it just like that sense of vastness is so dear to me that it's just really, you know, I don't know how to explain it more than that. I mean, we take off and we're just driving around for hours, and it's like, wow, you know, this is incredible. I remember the first trip I took with Bill was from, at that point we were leaving from North Carolina. I went to Denver, where he's originally from, and that was the first time that I had ever been across by car in the same country with that length of, you know, I remember like Nebraska, it was just like 8 hours straight, 9 hours.
like endless.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember like just completely going catatonic. It terrified me because I had no idea what the space was, you know.
I
And-
remember driving across country. I grew up in New York, so I grew up across country in 1982. And I remember coming to Kansas, and I had a really psychic episode because I kept on thinking I was driving by the same cornfield over and
Everybody
over
does.
again for 8 hours.
And I remember I think, you know, Europe is like double the population, half the territory. You're on top of each other. The landscape has been changed for thousands of years. It's just complete. There is no place that of the original land at all, right? So you're used to this complete like human, human-made environment. Then you go out there, and I remember I literally went catatonic, and then because I could every once in a while I would see way in the distance a farm, right, a little farm, and I'm like, oh my God, these people never talk to each other. They never get together. It was just like, just to me it was. But then I just that's vastness to me is just extraordinarily beautiful now.
So you had an opportunity. One thing that I was most excited about with your work is, and turning over the gallery to you and Elizabeth was, and I think we'll all see this when we go over there later, is you had an availability to work big. And boy, did you maximize that. I should have realized that when I was giving somebody from Brooklyn the square footage of what I thought would be the maximum size, that you would take the whole square footage.
Well, yeah.
No, but like, how did that feel to you? Because I remember it was a really beautiful moment that I had for you when we were installing your work, and you stepped back and you saw it big within that context and in that little intimate space, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always, the shows that I make, the series that I make are just unique to the space and the place. So to me, it's always such a great thing to have, to be able to do. I mean, it's just, I'm being so fortunate now to just be able to do that. It's like, oh yeah, you can do this in this space, and then I just take over. I mean, I react to the space in a certain way that, it just becomes this physical kind of sense of, getting close to that wall and just, adhering to it. And and also that, I think there is that. And then also technically, I think when they're that big, I'm in front of my mistakes big time. I can't, I can't hide. So again, it puts me in that danger zone that I need to be in to try to figure out what it wants to be. So it's all these little tricks. I've kind of known and been an admirer of your work for years, but I was amazed that, it's one thing when you can draw in a sketchbook, and it could be, it's small, and it can retain its spontaneity, its life, its kind of sense of wonder and abstraction. But a lot of people kill it when they try to make a big work out of it. And every work of yours that's in this gallery completely succeeds for me in that, of retaining that notion of, I don't want to say childlike, but it's this sense of, usually people, when they consider making abstract art, they leave that notion of the kind of exploration and the wonder that they were originally attracted to it by. And yours retain all of that for me. Does that make? Yeah, I think it's because I'm so focused on letting the piece tell the story. So there's a story behind it. So I just have to follow the story. That's my job. I have to stay out of the way and follow the story. So whatever the story needs, I do it. I mean, those are the moments where they're better than the others. It's when I'm trying to control the story and not. And so I think that's what you're talking about, because when I'm drawing, it's the same exact thing. There's a story in my head. I'm not making shapes just to make shapes so that they stick to each other and look at the spatial stuff. I don't know. I'm drawing a story in my head. Yeah. So I think that's why it continues on whatever size it is. So one thing that I became aware of in thinking about this talk tonight was, and I think it's because I am a white male, I think of abstraction in terms of formal qualities. Mm-hmm. But when I tried to get outside myself, I started to see abstraction in relation to power. Mm-hmm. And so I, why does it do that? Okay, so I had this question for you. Is abstraction for you, or in general, do you see it as a way of taking or back or regaining power? Since history itself is an abstraction told by those in power, what does your act of abstracting history provide to you or the viewer? Well, I think it's going back to that initial thing that we were saying. I mean, I think um, there is a history of 20-some thousand years of women creating patterns that were very specific to the group they were in. They used all these materials that were on hand and developed all these techniques. I mean, you can ask any weaver, you can sit at a loom and try to do something, not gonna happen. I mean, it's extremely difficult. It takes hours and hours of practice, just like making a painting, like everything else. So it's not something, it's an endeavor that is just as important as anything else, really. But because it's a female-driven endeavor through the centuries, it's not being considered, you know, as important. But initially, women categorized these language so that you could look at somebody over the hill and look at the colors on that person and say, oh no, that I gotta shoot that person. That's, you know, there were all these warnings within the system on, yeah, you know, clothing. And clothing made humanity possible. We were clothed, we were covered, we were protected, all these kind of things. There was that. But also I think there were the superosa, the whole idea of women communicated from generation, from woman to woman, about, you know, birth control, abortion, all these things were all embedded in knowledge that has been pushed again by the patriarchy over and over and over again. So it's a real, for me, it's really part of connecting with that. And that's why I don't know where I'm going, because it's been so muddled, and a lot of the knowledge is lost. A lot of the knowledge has been, whatever it's left is dearly fought for. So I think that's where I plug in, again, intellectually, you know, it's just, I'm not trying to pursue to try to connect to that, so.
Yeah, when I worked at Christie's Auction House in New York for 6 years, and I was their lighting and visual coordinator. So I remember this one sale that was coming up. There was 2 sales going on at the same time, and the one was color field painting and contemporary art from the 60s, and right down the hall was a sale that was of indigenous weavings and patterns and carpets, and so the reason they do that is because by law, if you're going to purchase something, you have to be able to view it in person before you buy it. So I was responsible for setting up these 2 exhibitions, and I became aware, walking back and forth down the hallway, that the installation I was doing of the fabrics and the textiles of the indigenous people were making the modern paintings look like garbage. And I actually said to him, you might want to rethink doing this, because you thought it was a clever idea to put these 2 things down the hall from each other, but it's really revealing the shallowness of a lot of contemporary abstraction, you know.
Yeah, there's a great book that's called Rawhide that was done in the 30s or so, and it's really interesting because it's the last, this woman artist, I think it's out of anyway, she went and spent time with the women. By then there was basically no more buffalo, right? So the skin, that knowledge that was, I mean, it's mind-blowing reading that book. The knowledge that it takes to actually take that pelt and turn it into those masterpieces, it's mind-blowing. It's just, and it's generational, right? But there were no more pelts available, and that knowledge died because cow leather is brittle, is tough, buffalo is supple, is, you know, they could do all this stuff, but so she went and recorded all the pattern, the abstractions of all those patterns, what they meant. So you look at the book and you go, you know, it's like, no, this is not just a triangle this way with another square this way. This means this, and this, and this. It's very specific. And it's so engaged with the reality of the present they're in. You know, it's just, it's incredible. So, I mean, you know, the G. Benz quilt, I've known about them forever. That's not, you know, the Amish quilts. I mean, they're masterpieces.
They are, yeah.
But because the female made, they're not looked at for what they are. They are masterpieces, period. You can't escape from looking at them and go, okay, you know. But I think that's part of the reason. I mean, and then, you know, abstraction of history, I mean, that's the way, again, it's because that's the way I like to corner myself into the work. And I think my hope is like, and it happened again last night in Duluth, is simply talking to people, and then they'll come up to me and, you know, when it's abstract, I think, because American history, well, any kind of history is so bloody, right? You know, we always feel put on. There is these things where it's like, well, are you telling me, you know? But I think when you bring people in that way with the abstraction, there is a need to try to understand, and a need to try to make this loop with the piece that you're looking at. You try to understand, well, what is that? This kind of looks familiar. What is it? So I try to have that as a basis for a conversation. Now, I don't, you know, it's happened a number of times to me where people will come up to me and then start telling me their stories, which is I absolutely cherish. Those are the best moments for me. It's like, oh wow, I reckon, you know, this is like, wow, this is from the, you know, my grandfather used to work in this, you know, smelting plant, and you know, and then they just tell me their whole story, and it's like, that's what I try to offer, you know. It's just a moment to just kind of think differently, you know,
Yeah.
because I think that's part of the abstraction. I think it's just, it's that idea that you come in something that, because we've been trained to think that it's not, and you know, that it's unusual, which is not really, because it's been there forever, but it's been represented as something that, oh, this is a little bit of a more of a, almost like uppity, you know, way of looking at things, which is not true. And that's why also I think there's that idea of like, it's really detrimental to all of us as viewers to just be brought in where everything, well, this is an abstract painter, blah, blah, blah. This is a figure of the painter, blah, blah, blah. It puts everybody in these boxes and our reaction in a box. So, you know, there's all this stuff that churns around my head. And,
Right.
and the thing is that, you know, I have to also say that there's all this stuff, but I don't know if I'm successful at all. I don't, you know, maybe I'll have a good painting, you know, it's not, but I wish that, you know, I'm hoping that I can keep pushing where I can get where I can kind of.
That's a great segue to what I have next. And it has to do with, we had a moment, I think you came in my director's office, Danielle Thomas's office, and you were talking about, this is months and months ago, you were talking about your Duluth show, and you were talking about being invited in by the curator because they had connections to the indigenous people.
The director, yeah.
Is that the director? I'm sorry, yeah. And you were talking about how they realized from your work that you were an ally, and I heard what you said, and how they entrusted you as an ally to process their history, and then go tell your history to those that are outside their community. And I was like, oh, that I understand that artistically. And then I saw this.
Yeah, the bumps, yeah.
And I have to tell you, I teared up. This, first of all, not only was it the scale of it, but knowing from what you had talked about, and knowing, you know, it was incredibly meaningful for me and impactful for me. And then you had mentioned to me a couple minutes before the talk that the director went in, the curator went in and said, I wanted to lay down underneath this painting because.
She got there at 7 in the morning and she said, I just laid down underneath and she started crying.
So I think there is a level in success, Carole, in your translations and abstractions, but please tell us about this before we go on.
About this piece particular. So this is called, I didn't know how to say goodbye. I didn't say those words. I mean, again, I didn't know what the show was going to be about. I was struggling to try to figure out, how am I going to relate to it? How do I translate this massive amount of information into something that, just kind of made sense at some level. And so when I was in Duluth, one time the DAI, the Duluth Art Institute, shares a space with this huge old train station. And the bottom part is all the Historical Society. And they have an area where they basically have like the immigration area, right? So you have pretty much, I mean, it's an incredible diaspora of people up there, that have been there. It's just, the director is Ojibwe was telling me, I want you to talk about the diaspora of Duluth. There's so many people from all over the world. And so I was looking at all the names, all the nationalities and everything, and then you get in this one little room that has like the same benches that would be in Ellis Island. And then there is a half-hour short there that's plays on a loop, and I just kind of sat down, and I think, just still kind of trying to figure out what am I going to do. And I'm looking at this, and it was made for Ellis Island, and they interviewed. So Ellis Island, I think, closed around 1950, late 40s, 50s, right? And so they interviewed in the 90s a bunch of people that had been very young then, coming in, and their impression of, coming out, looking at the Statue of Liberty, and then like they had never seen skyscrapers and this whole thing. It's all about that. But also they were talking about what they left, and a lot of them, of course, left for all kinds of reasons, from persecution to famine to And for me, I'm a fourth generation immigrant. I mean, people have always left around me all the time. When I was a little kid, wake up in the morning and say, oh, where's Carole? I'm just going to play with Carole. Oh, they're gone. What do you mean they're gone? She said, no, they're gone. They left last night. And you weren't told. And all of a sudden you lost your little friend. And so where did they go? Oh, Argentina. And then I'll be looking at the map, going frantically. And then realize I'll never see them again, right? So there was all this. So there was that, my own personal understanding and feelings around it. And then she says, this woman appears on the screen, and this elder woman, and she says, yeah, she's like what is now called Eastern Europe. And she said, yeah, I was young. I was maybe, I think she said 8 or 10 years old. And we all gathered, and they put us on these carts, and they have images of like black and white, this stuff. And then we were all sitting there with all our suitcases and all our stuff, and she goes, and then everybody around came to say goodbye, and she looked at the camera straight and she said, I didn't know how to say goodbye. And I just sat there, my jaw dropped, and I was like, oh my God, that's it. She didn't know because she had never left before. So that became kind of the part of it that I could connect. The Dakotas were wiped out, and whatever was left, the 200 or few left, were sent out on their Trail of Tears all the way to Oklahoma. So there were all these forced, imposed things. People were coming out of desperation. So I get, okay, that's the title, right? But I need to make a piece that's based on that. And I was at Gentle in Wyoming at a residency, and I'm sitting there, and it's a great studio to have a cot, which every studio should have. You should have a bed in your studio. And I was just like, oh, I had done everything else. I'm like, this sentence, how do I make it justice? And I just went to sleep, and I remember just bolting up, sitting, I was like, bundles, I gotta make bundles. And then so I put that on the wall, and then I said, okay, now slow the way down. Wow. And I just took watch it slowly, made all these marks very slowly, and it just built up. I had no idea how it was going to end. And it was like, okay, that's it, I'm done. That was kind of the last piece I made for the show, but it became kind of the linchpin around it. So
it's incredible.
But it took me all these other pages to get to that, to know what it was about.
I want to move ahead because I want to open for questions, but you did mention Mark Bradford. And we had talked about power, right?
Right.
So, why is my thing doing that? So Mark Bradford, a wonderful, incredible abstract painter. If power is abstraction, which many black men, black women, and people of color have very little voice in, well then I want to sit at the table. So what is it about abstraction that allows this to happen?
I think it's because, to paraphrase Sam, my last name, it's understood in some way in a revolutionary practice. You force somebody to look at something that they're not familiar with. So when you're not familiar with something, you need to go somewhere else, to try to understand. So that's the part that's like, I think that's what he's talking about.
Right.
The power of it is that you show, his work is extraordinary. I mean, he's beyond a genius to me, but his idea of presenting, like the layer, I can't wait to go see his show. It's up until July. And it's just thousands and thousands of layers of information that he builds, and then you just you understand that there's so much history, but you kind of look at it and you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And that pushes you off the pedestal.
Right.
That pushes you off your, and that's what you want, basically. It's like, how do I engage with somebody without preconceived ideas?
Yeah.
I think that's what he means, the power of it. I think that's pretty much the way I understand it. So.
Yeah, and the last one was I found in reading on, he says, I don't know why we in the art world cannot unpack things and sort of make hybrid notions of a practice. We're very rigid. It's funny, in music we have no problem sampling, mixing, remixing, but in the art world we can't take the little parts of history and mix it together.
Yeah.
That's pretty profound, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's at the core of your work as well.
Yeah, but I ain't back Mark Bradford.
Yeah, but you're not. But
But I
you
understand.
are dealing with. When I saw this quote, I did think of your practice and your work. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It's true. I mean, that whole obsession. I think the obsession has to do also with the art business, which is just so messed up. It's just ridiculous, right? So it's like, well, we need to put you in this little box so some bot can write this 5-page BS about you, and then this is what you are. It's like, no, I'm a human being. I don't know what I'm going to wake up with tomorrow morning, and if I don't want to do this, I'm going to do something else.
Yeah.
So the impositions are really the business of art and how to sell something, and so that has become. I think I was reading this interesting thing that said about being creative and creativity. Creativity, the word creativity became a thing in the 50s, but it was basically used by companies to sell products. So like, oh, you will be creative if you use this, this flour to make cookies or whatever. So it became this thing where it had nothing to do with being creative, the act of, the process of, all that.
Right.
But creativity has become this kind of distorted, sellable way of thinking that has no reality in the process of making art,
Yeah.
And it is business. It's the business of art. It's completely different than making, as you know, it's completely different than making the work. So, yeah, he's totally right.
Yeah. Well, listen, I wanted to.
Ooh, damn.
That's it. It's a big Q&A, Carole. That's a big. No, I could have gone on with you for a long time, but I do think that I knew certain people were going to be here. I thought the questions.
Did you pay them?
No, I don't have to pay. I just gave them drinks.
Oh, there you go.
Maybe that's like paying them, but I didn't. I just gave them drinks.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I don't have that much money. No, but no. So first of all, thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
And second of all, I'm really excited about the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes of questions. So,
All right. Fire low.
do we have anybody that has a question for Carole? There has to be somebody in the room that's going
That's
to.
not a question,
Please.
but I've been put in a position where Dan compares me to someone completely out of line, and I don't know a lot about Mark, I don't know a lot about contemporary work, but I
Right.
love Mark Bradford's work. And I like Mark Bradford as a person, which I think is more important. Frankly.
Yeah.
Just as important, yeah.
Yeah.
And I walk in from the restaurant, as I heard you say, like, I'm not Mark Bradford.
Right.
But what I would say is that I've had enough conversations know that, like, I recognized your ability to speak really directly about your work and to understand it in a way that was accessible to you, but also became accessible to me. And one of the things when I discovered Mark Bradford and I started to listen to what he had to say about his work, that really struck me was his deep understanding of what he was doing, deep commodifying. Even though he was participating in the contemporary art community, his ability to talk directly about abstraction was like shattering. Amazing. And to be cognizant of the fact that he participates in, and we all participate to some degree in the economy of, visual art, whatever. So sorry that Dan pulled the Mark Bradford part on you, but I would say that
Carole brought it up. I'm just being a good steward. That's all.
See, I'm never gonna text you again.
I like that you started this conversation with receipts. That's pretty simple. But no, I would say that, in regards to, talking to someone that operates in that arena, like, the first time that we got comfortable enough to really talk casually about your work, it was clarity. It didn't need precedent of any sort. So I could see the Mark Bradford part. I think he's very aware of the histories he's coming from and, like, visual language in regards to, like, trying to talk about that without.
Right. But I think also, I have to say, it seems like, I met so many artists, there was just always that practice in there, no matter what we do, it's just like, you gotta think about it. You can't just be, it's not random, you have to think about it, and when you get engaged with the physicality of it, then hopefully you have thought about it enough that becomes, there's that transformation where it becomes its own thing. But it doesn't happen unless you work your butt out for years, right? It's 10,000 hours of, to get to some kind of level, and then after that, you need the rest of your life to try to figure out what to do with it. I think that's a humbling part of it. I know that I'll never achieve what I want to with it, but it's also, I think that's the extraordinary thing, that we can say as artists. Like, I'm not gonna retire. It's not gonna happen. So,
That was my non-question, so I just wanted to say.
Thank you for your non-question,
Thank you for
Richard.
the non-question.
It's funny, I'm a painter, and I am fortunate enough to have collected Richard's work. And
Me too.
I always thought that painterly abstraction was the purest abstraction. Maybe it's because I do it, and I thought, whatever, I don't know what, but I don't have any paintings up in my house. I'm surrounded by these surroundings, and they all make me cry when I leave my house. I'm like, why does that cup make me fucking cry when I leave my house? It's just, so I'm learning every day. It's like it is. It's just one of these things where I think I had the pleasure of talking to Anthony in his studio the other day, and I said, the one thing about, like so many people, the sad part of so many young artists coming up is that the business wants them to sound like they have shit figured out. And it's just so horrible, because the more you get on in your life and the more you experience art and artists and things, and you just learn more and more, Jesus, I don't know a fucking thing. I'm just in this wrestling match.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna stay in the wrestling match because it's meaningful to me. But I don't know a world outside it, so I can't venture into the world outside it. But I don't know, Anthony is painting this yellow kind of
I gotta come over.
lamp with a belly in his studio. And it's this strange object that makes me, reasserts the fact that I just don't know anything, And it's such a beautiful place to be at, of like,
For sure.
Does anybody else have a question for Carole? Somebody has to have a question. Hector, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're such a nice guy and I can do that. So what do you think, what can you come up with on the spot to answer?
The only thing I offer, or I contribute is to another question. your experience as an immigrant, because you said that you were a person from the world.
Right.
So in that particular process of taking and leaving, can you elaborate about your influences, which you incorporated, which you took away, which are still with you?
Well, I think, like I said, I didn't take much out of the Western, because I just didn't like it. You know, I just don't relate to it. I mean, I can go and look at it and say, wow, this is extremely well executed, wonderful drapery, and wow, look at those skin tones, but I don't emotionally relate to it. I always, when I was a little kid, you know, was obsessed with Art Deco, mind you, the quintessential, not only real American architecture, and I just looked at it all the time. You know, Nutra was like, I looked at all these pictures and like, you know, it's like, oh my God, these houses, you know. So those were really the things that I wanted to look at. But there was also the mythical part of the American landscape, all these things that we all kind of grow up with in America, you know, and just seeing that became this real kind of almost, you know, like I said, I felt like, wow, you know, stop destroying this, you know, this is so beautiful. So, I mean, my influences really were that, coming into and trying to understand the culture. And because I had grown up post-war, all I had were questions for the adults, and all the adults would, you know, you would hear them, you know, like, oh, damn Germans, and it's like, what did they do? Oh, you don't want to know. It's like, what? What did they do? You know? And then boom, something would blow up because, you know, I was like, okay, something's not, you know. I was like trying to so I became really obsessed with history, but also all along, since I was little. I mean, I taught myself how to read because my parents were poor; they didn't have time to do all this stuff. So I just taught myself because I was obsessed trying to understand what was going on, but also drew all the time. Right? Every single thing that I read became something that was scratched on a piece of paper. And so I've always done, that's the way I've always processed information, I think. And the darker the information, the more I feel like I need to go deeper into finding some light of some sort. I mean, I do that, you know, and so when I came to the States, the same thing happened. Oh, you're going to the United States, it's so great, yeah. And then I get to New York, it's like 1979, and I'm looking, it's like piles of trash to the ceiling, and so many homeless people, and I'm like, what is wrong with this? And I'm like, okay, well, you know, I've been trained with looking at what had happened in Europe, and I'm like, wait a minute, 90% of these people in the streets are family, and they're people of color. What is going on with this? Because I remember seeing Martin Luther King, I remember hearing the women's liberation movement, all these things that were really so important to us as kids. And I get to New York, it's like, wait, you know, what is going on here? So then I became obsessed with like learning American history. And again, that same way I process the same exact way, and I've been doing that ever since. I mean, it's always a question mark. I always, you know, there's always something else that I can learn. And I'm really interested in regional history because I think it's too much to grasp the entire picture, right? So I like to just work with smaller areas or a state, and then I just kind of plug into that. So it's just a way of trying to, you know, try to maybe sleep at night. I don't know. You know, so process the information that's always 90% of it is just really nasty, you know. So I think art has given me that way of just processing and being able to maybe connect with somebody, and, you know. So it's just, I mean, it's a gift for me, and I had to wait a long time before I was able to actually do the work I wanted to do. So I'm just incredible. I walk around incredibly grateful. I mean, I just, you know, I can't believe the last few years have been so rewarding for me. I've been given all these opportunities to just show the work the way I want it. And that's, you know, I mean, how lucky can I be, you know? So that's it. It all just kind of converges through the history of the United States. That's it. Well, I don't know.
Thank you, Carole. You're wonderful. Everybody, can we give Carole a round of applause, please?